Hello and welcome to the That's So Craven podcast, your Fulham podcast from Down Under. We're here today to discuss the Fulham versus West Ham 1-0 loss from yesterday. A really tough result taken. Really does feel like it's a tough road ahead for Fulham. 5 games now without a victory, 5 defeats in a row, I believe it is as well. Here to discuss it all, we have Elton. How are we going?
Oh, hi, Jack. This is sounding all too familiar, isn't it? Your intros are almost on repeat.
Yeah, it does feel a bit like that at the moment. Just some really disappointing results, but not just results, disappointing displays as well. I know we talked about the previous games, and you can understand losing to Arsenal in the way we did. You can understand the Man United result as well, but it's starting to feel like we're just unable to get those points, and we've been sitting on 39 points now for what feels like months. And constantly going, you know what, 39 points. We haven't hit 40, but we're safe. We're safe. And it's just feeling a little edgy now. I mean, West Ham now moved to 30 points after that victory. And a few of the other teams down the table got some wins. I saw Wolves beat Chelsea. The bottom of the table is starting to rise up towards us a little bit. And, with still a fair few games to go, are there any worries sort of starting to creep in for you?
Well, what is concerning me is that performance was a bit predictable in
Mm.
every worst possible way. I wasn't surprised at our inability to score goals. I wasn't surprised at our misfortune in conceding a goal against the run of play. And I think beyond a funk, I think we've really got a serious problem now that feels difficult, difficult for us to rise above.
Yeah, it really does at the moment. One thing to, I guess, bear in mind to try and be a little bit positive is I did see a tweet come out saying, Marco Silva's been in charge of Fulham now for, I think, 80 or 90 games. And this is the first blip he's really had. And to be fair, like we cruised through the championship season really comfortably, performed really well, got all the results we needed. That was fine. First half of this season, we've been, a dream. Really, we can't have asked for too much more. And finally, we're starting to see a little blip. And as a few people have said as well, at least it's happening at the end of the season with 8 games to go, rather than happening at the start of the season. Imagine if we were on this run first, in the first 10 games, we lose 5 of them. Um, you'd be, we'd be worried. But it sort of takes a little bit of the pressure off because we are effectively safe. I know the table is starting to creep up a bit, but realistically, over the next 8 games, we should pick up the sort of, I mean, really, we probably only need 3 points to guarantee safety. Teams don't go down with 40, but um, it's just feeling like, as we were worried about, this season's just starting to peter out now. And without Mitro in the team, we just look a little bit flaccid, if that's a fair term to use. Do you agree with that?
It's a very colourful term to use, Jack. Um, I think I wouldn't put myself in the camp of pointing the finger at some sort of crack in the silver strategy as overall as a manager. This sort of second half fizzle out. I think it's too easy to try and blame that as some kind of reason for this. I think if you analyze it properly, as we do ad nauseum, I think it's kind of pretty obvious what's going
Mm.
wrong. We don't have the depth, and we certainly don't have the depth in areas where we're now suddenly have been caught short. And well, I'm sure we'll talk about it in more detail, but we've got big problems in key areas that I don't, I don't see a way out of. Certainly, if we stick to our current game plan, I don't see a way out of it.
Well, yeah, that's it's an interesting point that you raise there, and I'll actually throw to William, who's following along on Facebook on our live stream here, who poses a question that I was going to pose myself anyway. But Vinicius, as William says in his question here, Vinicius seems a poor option up front. Do we stick with him or do we shuffle the deck for another option? So I guess just to expand on that, I think we can all agree that there's such a gap between Mitro and Vinicius that it's always going to be hard for Vinny to actually fulfill that role wholly and completely. So we're always going to be searching for how we can get the best out of Vinicius. Now, I don't think he is uh, uh, the same style of player as Mitro, and so I think we're sticking with our system, and it's just not really working at the moment. My only issue is we saw what happened last time we changed how we play, where we tried to play Bobby up front, and it just didn't work. I think we do have other options there with potentially playing Solomon up front and playing a false nine and basically not playing a striker at all. And just playing a bank of four across the attacking midfield sort of section of the pitch, but it just feels like we're trying and trying to do the same thing over and over again, and it's just not working. And surely there has to be a shift at some point.
Well, firstly, can I say that I'm actually starting to feel quite sorry for Vinny. I really
Hmm.
am, because I don't want to be personally on him, because it's actually not his fault. I don't think it's an effort issue from his perspective. Like you said at the outset here, he's simply not. He's not um, Alexander Mitrovic. He doesn't have his skills. He doesn't. He's not the same style of player. He doesn't make the same kind of runs. He doesn't appear in the same places. He doesn't have his abilities to drop deep and start creative movements. Although, having said that, um, he's been involved with two or three really really beautiful moves,
Yeah.
and which he absolutely must be given credit for. That unfortunately is not enough. To the point, to William's point, and something that loads of people have talked about, and what we've talked about as well. If the only one time we've ever seriously tried this, of changing the system and putting Bobby up front, was probably a pretty difficult test case where we put Bobby up front at
Mm.
Brighton,
Yeah.
and that was a very difficult set of circumstances to present to Bobby and the team, because of the way they play. They shut it down very very quickly. They worked it out instantly,
Mm.
and I'm going to say that. But Bobby David Reed is no slouch with the ball at his feet. He's actually quite skillful, and he's got
No, I agree.
2
Yeah.
feet. And I think actually we truthfully we certainly did not serve him well enough for
Mm.
that to be considered a completely failed concept and something never to be tried again. If I look at, and I know we didn't try a different system last night. We simply have replaced Vinny Mitrovic with Vinny, and we try to play in the same fashion, down the wings to Vinny. But we were awful in the way in which we try to serve him. It was actually really disappointing and very frustrating. So we're neither fish nor fowl. We're neither serving that striker, you know, target man properly. And I'm not sure that the message, the emails got through to the wingers to either, come centrally much earlier and play the ball through Pereira, who then plays directly to the target man, or if you want to persist with the balls down the wing, we actually play to feet and somehow come in and don't try and find them in the air, because we're doing neither properly.
Yeah, well, a point to make if I skip through on our slides here to look at the match stats, we can see the number of passes Fulham completed during the game compared to West Ham, especially 659 passes for Fulham to West Ham's 196. Now,
Yeah.
I'd love to see the crossing stats because Fulham just seemed to be putting the ball into the box, and it felt a little bit aimless a few times. I don't know your thoughts on the crossing, but it just felt like we weren't. And maybe it's because we're missing Mitro, and Mitro's just in the position often enough, getting his head on the ball, and we're just putting it in there. And Mitro being Mitro gets to the ball every single time, and Vinicius isn't that player, but it just felt like we didn't try anything else. We kept pumping the ball
Mm.
into the box, and we were getting absolutely nothing from it. Um,
I
and
thought
so
I'm gonna.
it's just no. Go on, go on.
Sorry, Jack. I as much as we always try to remain incredibly positive and don't criticize players, I think it has to be said that I thought Anthony Robinson was really patchy. He didn't have an awful game overall last night. He did
Mm,
some good things, but his crossing into the box I thought was terrible,
yeah,
terrible last night. And there were a number of times where, uh, he literally put the ball at a very uh, gentle height and pace directly to the keeper's hands. Like,
yeah,
you know,
or
there have,
floated to the back post where we had absolutely
yeah,
no one near the back
yep,
post. We're easy
yep.
claim for the keeper or a defender to just see the ball through. Basically,
And it
it
would be
just
really easy to dump on Vinny for that or anyone appearing in the box, but it was nowhere near them. It was the
yeah.
delivery was awful.
That's what I
Um,
mean when I say aimless. I feel like
yeah,
we were just
yeah,
basically going through the motions of this is how we've scored goals this season so far. We put a ball into the box and someone gets their head on it and scores, but we weren't actually trying to pick out a player most of the time. It seemed we were just putting the ball in the
yeah.
box and crossing our fingers and seeing what happens. And I think that's where we massively fell down because we weren't playing smart. And we've seen Silva really dominate games because of his smarts so far. And we just felt, yeah, aimless is the only word I can think of because we didn't have any real direction. It felt like we were passing the ball around the edge of the box, trying to find an opportunity, and it wasn't coming, but we weren't trying anything different. I saw a couple of little instances where I think it could have been Pereira flicking a ball into the box, like the outside of his foot, trying to just lift it over the defense and at least trying something a little bit different. And that's the kind of stuff that you need to do a little bit more often. But I saw Willian shifting the ball from side to side, trying to find space for himself and just not getting any space but not trying anything different at the same time as well. And it just felt like we were completely out of ideas. And it's almost like with Mitra out of the side, what do we do? How do we win this game? And no one had any answers. And that's the worry for me. We just
Uh,
don't seem to have answers.
I'm going to say that I thought our attacking play, if one could even characterize it as that last night, was
Mm.
sometimes appeared to me to be not even Premier League quality. It really
Yeah.
wasn't. If I think back to like those Sunderland games, those FA Cup games,
Mm.
they were more direct, damaging, incisive, and skillful
Yeah.
than us last night. We looked woeful, um, and that all of that against what has to be emphasised here was a really poor West Ham side. On paper, not a poor side. In reality, they were a weak, weak, weak opposition,
Yeah.
and we had it completely over them for most of the game. And that goal was against the run of play, and just like, yep, Fulhamish.
I mean, I did a bit of Googling around this morning, just looking at articles and trying to get a bit of an understanding of how everyone feels after the game. It's pretty easy to understand how that they do feel. But I came across an article on Hammers.news written by a West Ham fan, who and basically the headline: David Moyes fools nobody with cowardly tactics and woeful display during West Ham win over Fulham. And there's not many times I think where a team gets a win and someone writes an article and the whole way through the
Wow.
article he's just saying it was the worst performance I've ever seen. I got messages from fellow West Ham fans saying that was disgusting, and they are
Shout out Shuj.
bitterly, yeah, well, exactly the person who did send it through. They're bitterly disappointed with the style of play. Even though they're getting points, they're upset with the victory, which kind of speaks volumes about how bad West Ham are at the moment. But I think flip that round and say, Fulham, how are Fulham losing to a team like this?
Well, it's simple, Jack. It's simple. The game, to remind you, is to the object of the game is to score goals. If you can't, you cannot win games. You just
Exactly.
cannot win.
That's the big problem. Is at the moment we look like we don't know how to score goals, and it's frustrating because you watch the goal we scored against Bournemouth and how beautifully we worked the ball around, how everyone just sort of clicked, and you know that we can do it, but it seems like we just ran out of ideas for some reason, and
But
as soon as we went down, the heads seemed to drop a little bit, and maybe it's because it was an own goal, sort of against the run of play a little bit as well, and you could see what West Ham were going to do instantly after that. They were just happy to sit on the edge of the box, but you have to be good enough to break down a team like that, and we just weren't.
I think, I haven't really thought about this before, but your point about the beauty and efficiency of that Bournemouth goal and the fact that it was almost out of character because we haven't even tried that. I could not count on one hand the number of times we've tried to create goals like that this season. And it's not that players don't have the skill, but it's not part of the way we play. And as much as I feel sorry for Vinicius that he's got this opportunity with Metro now sidelined, but we simply can't serve him and he can't rise above the circumstances to score or create individual efforts which bring about wins. Can I
Mm.
put it that way? Right. So do we have any choice where we actually do have the skill to cut sort of lower table teams open with that kind of play because we're good enough passers and skillful enough footballers? Is it time, like back to William's question, is it time to kind of throw out the Vinicius end of season 7-8 game experiment and just try and knock those balls around, open up defenses and score the kind of goals that the goal we did at Bournemouth? Maybe it is.
I mean, it possibly and probably is. I'd say. I think you had to give Vinicius time. I think the worst thing we could have possibly done was just discount Vinicius and say you haven't been good enough this season, and therefore we're not playing you. I think that would have been the wrong thing to do, and it would have sent the wrong message. I think now we can fairly comfortably say after two performances, he's not scoring goals for us, and he's not even looking like scoring goals for us. I don't think Vinicius had a shot on target last night. Not even sure from memory how many shots on goal he had in total. Um, and I
I don't think
just
he had any.
feel, not that I can remember off the top of my head, I just feel like um, we need to do something different because if we continue doing what we're doing, it's going to get pretty ugly. And we're now 5 losses in a row, 4 losses in a row in the league. We're searching for that 1 point to get us to 40, and we just can't find it at the moment. And without Mitra on the side, it's going to get it's going to get tough. We don't have an easy run of games, as we're starting to see. The teams in this relegation scrap are not pushovers, and I'm fractionally worried. I don't think we're going to get pulled into a relegation scrap. Like I think we're way past that now, and I think we can be pretty comfortable with that. But we've got to play Everton this coming week. Yeah, and so next Saturday. Again, a poor side, but I wouldn't put it past them to give us a bit of a scare. And if we continue to play the way we're playing and not actually creating good chances, I think we're going to be in for another tough ride against them. And we play Leeds after that, also struggling at the moment, but in a position where they have to win games. And so we're going to be on the back foot in all of these games. And then we come up against Liverpool, Man City, Man United before the end of the season as well. Uh, I remember looking at these fixtures going, 5 games there, we can get 15 points from this and be in Europe. Now I'm looking at it going, can we try and find 1 point out of these 5 games?
So do we kind of get invested here and just go, right, how do we do this? How let's change the system, and how do we do this? And then who are the best practitioners for it? And can we adapt? Can the left and right back and wingers adapt overall to this new system? And who plays up front? What does it look like?
Can I ask a question in response, I guess, or a precursor to that question? Um, do we think that the players we currently have playing are performing well enough, or do we think we need to make some more sweeping changes? Because I think, for me, there's a couple of players who were very poor last night and have been poor for a little while now. I'm looking at Andreas Pereira, who I think had a really bad game last night. Um, Harrison Reed, I think, is a good player, but I don't think he, especially when you're coming up against a team like West Ham, where you don't really need an extra defensive midfielder. I would have liked to see potentially Lukic or even Kearney start, and be a little bit more creative and push us forward a bit more. Does is it working with Willian and BDR? Do we need to change it up? Willian, you know, all the tricky feet in the world, but it seemed like he couldn't actually create a chance last night, which was a little bit worrying as well. I'm just wondering if there's a bigger issue going on where, yes, we don't have that much squad depth, but at the moment the players in the squad aren't performing well enough. Do we need to make more sweeping changes?
I'm going to put in the counter argument to that and go. I didn't think I didn't think Pereira's game was absolutely awful last night. I thought some of his crosses, dead ball crosses, were actually pretty good.
Mm,
In open play, I guess you could argue that his form over the last few weeks hasn't been amazing, but he did obviously put that goal away at Bournemouth. So it's not just about the finish, but the fact that he was actually working with the others and he arrived at the right place at the right time. And that says to me, his mind and he's still in form, because you don't arrive, you don't even arrive to actually close that out if you're not in form. You're ball watching, or you're just not involved in the play, right? I'm
yeah,
and as to Willian, I think Willian is so skillful, so experienced, and so creative that if you gave him a different system, I think he'd adapt to it in a moment, in an absolute heartbeat. I actually think Bobby Decordova-Reid in on the wing. I think he was dragged last night to give us another option when we just couldn't find a way forward. I don't think he had an awful game. He sort of drifted out of the game a bit, but again, if we were to change our strategy and to find ways of actually opening up their defense through clever passing, I'd actually rate Bobby to do that, even if he wasn't the man receiving the ball up front. Could Manor Solomon play a role in that? Absolutely, he could. Right.
mm,
So my bigger issue would be, how does Anthony Robinson fit into that? He's great at carrying the ball forward, and he can defend. He looks a bit vulnerable when he's in the box defending, but he absolutely can defend, and he can get the ball up there. And his job has been to cross the ball to find Mitro's head. But how does he go to get himself into the box and play little clever 1-2s? I don't know that he's the man. And I think if you're really one-footed and closed down by a couple of angles, you probably get caught and you run yourself into trouble. So it would kind of worry me. And there's no one behind him. Kazawa, if he's even fit,
I don't think
hasn't
Kazal was
proved.
anywhere near fit.
Yeah, and even if he was, he hasn't proved himself. I know he's actually participated in a couple of really nice goals, and he's done
Mm.
okay in the FA Cup. But I don't think he's proved himself in all facets of play at Premier League level for this Fulham team.
I
And I
think.
thought last night, Cedric. I'm going through a whole team wrap here, but I thought Cedric last night was patchy. Did
Mm,
some good things, but he's a little bit unreliable.
yep. Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think I quite liked his willingness to put a ball into the box. I thought
Mm,
that was a positive. Um, but again, I think a bit of he's missing a bit of match sharpness. It seemed, um, which is kind of fair enough, I guess, because he just hasn't actually played that many games this season. One thing, just to touch on your point on Robinson there, we see him get down the wing a lot. He's got a really great partnership with Willian, and they do a lot down that wing. He's only got the one assist so far this season. He's put in 107 crosses for a 24% cross accuracy, and he gets in the right position often, but he's just missing that final ball at the moment. Um, Interesting few comments coming through on the live stream here. I'll pop up one from Will, which was also echoed by Black, White, and Fred. Um, well, I'll put Black, White, and Fred up first. Shane Duffy up front if we persist with all these crosses. And William also says someone mentioned throwing Duffy up front as a bit of a left field change. I don't know enough about Duffy to form an opinion of whether that may work or not. Um, I mean, we've seen him thrown on last minute as a bit of an option up front, and we are putting in a lot of crosses. I don't think he's a Ian Pearce style centre back / striker, and I actually think we just need to change our system because crossing the ball to Vinicius
yeah,
is just not
yeah,
working at
I'm
the
with
moment.
you. I'm with you. I'd
Um,
rather I'd rather have a go at changing our system. I know it's very, very random and very radical, pardon me, for this point in the season, but I think trying to reinvent Duffy at this stage, I, I'd rather invest efforts and focus in actually uh, revitalizing players to just change it up completely to try and see if we can make something work. Because I was heartened by that goal at Bournemouth. It looked great
mm,
and it worked. We cut them apart. And, and even when Mitro does play, oftentimes we're hot and cold in our service to him. So why not try
yeah,
something completely different in the absence of Mitro and Vinny not being able to step up?
yeah, yeah. 100% agree. I think the other thing to consider there is you look at the stats. We dominated West Ham. If we were playing a different system and not just trying to lump balls into the box, and we had a different way of trying to score goals, I think we actually would have scored goals. But as I saw a few people saying 5 hours after the game finished, even if the game was still going now, I still think Fulham probably wouldn't have scored by now.
Hmm.
Um,
Fair,
and it
fair.
really did feel like that. It just looked like we had no idea what we were doing, and we just never looked really threatening, which is disappointing. The only best chance we had was from a free kick, which Tosin somehow managed to completely miss. Just needed to get any kind of little touch on it, and I reckon it would have got past the keeper there, and we might be
Hmm.
having a very different conversation if that ball had gone in. Um,
Jack,
but yeah,
Jack,
go on. Yep.
sorry, can we pick up on another comment thrown in here by Black, White, and Fred? Thanks for participating in your comments, which I think is an interesting one as well. And he says Andreas is guilty of trying too hard sometimes. And I saw that a couple of times. We all saw that a couple of times last night, where he just ran out of pitch, where he was running and dribbling and actually looking pretty good, but he sort of hadn't thought about where it was all going to end up and where
Mm.
he was actually going to then pass the ball to. And he just ran into a wall of players. It happened a couple of times, and maybe that kind of trying too hard is what you do when you start to get a bit frustrated that there is no option up front, so I've got to do more on my own, which is a bit of a sad indictment because you've kind of dropped your discipline and you're playing a different style and trying to do it on your own. But it's not that surprising that that kind of thing starts happening.
I think he's guilty of that most weeks, to be honest. I think, and maybe that you kind of accept that when you get the Brazilian flair from him as well, and some of the stuff that he is able to do is very impressive. But he does seem to overplay occasionally, and sometimes I'd like to see him choose the simpler ball rather than try and pick out the killer pass, and maybe just, I don't want to say put in more effort, because he does around the field. He puts in more effort than a lot of other players do. So I think it'd be harsh to say I want to see him put in more effort, but at the same time, I'd
Well,
just like to see him be a little bit more clinical.
that attempted overhead kick last week at Bournemouth came in for some criticism because he had time, and maybe someone should have reminded him that he did have time, but he
Yeah.
could have probably teed that up and used a putter at that point to slot it away
Mm.
because he had a lot of time and he obviously anyway. Um,
Yeah, I don't think we want to get on top of players for trying to be creative and trying new things at the same time. But I do agree that it feels like there are some instances where we'd just like to see him, like I said, be a little bit more clinical, play it a little bit more simple. Because sometimes trying to overdo it, unless everything's going your way and you're really getting the luck of the draw, and it just feels like at the moment the way we're currently performing and the way we're currently playing, you don't want someone who's trying too many extravagant things. You want to take it back to basics, and this is when you get on the park, on the training ground, and just drill into players the way they should be doing things. It just, yeah, it's all feeling just a little bit disappointing at the moment, and I was really hoping and crossing my fingers that we weren't flying towards a massive peter out for this season and a fizzle. But it's really starting to feel like that, and I'm, as I've said before, I'm fractionally worried about how this season ends, because I wouldn't be overly surprised if we only picked up 3 or 4 more points to the whole season, which is such a shame. And I know we would have taken 17th at the start of the year, but based on how we started this season, I feel like, now I would take 10th, but we should have been pushing for 7th at this point in the year, and we're just petering out and flying down. Well, fortunately, not flying down the table, but it feels like in a couple of weeks' time we might be finding ourselves dropping a little further than we'd hoped. Dan, let's
mm.
talk about just briefly the West Ham goal itself. Is there much Harrison Reed could have done there, or do you think this is just pure bad luck?
I think it's desperately bad luck, and I felt very sorry for him. And there was a lovely little moment where the camera just caught a half frame of Bert Leno literally kind of lifting him up off the ground
Mm.
and saying, "Don't worry about it, mate. Just carry on," because there's nothing he could have done. He wasn't. He didn't sort of arrive awkwardly, and he wasn't clumsy at all. He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Any other day, and he clears that.
And I also think if he doesn't get a touch on it, it goes to Antonio, who pokes that ball away
Mm,
more than likely. So he had to do
mm.
something there. The ball got kind of stuck under his feet. It's squirmed out and found
Kind
its
of
way
the
into the back
ball
of the
sort of
net.
hit him. The ball kind of hit him.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's a real
Um,
shame to concede a goal like that, but like we say,
we keeping
it's.
you up, Jack?
I was at a wedding last night, so I had to watch the game this morning. Feeling fractionally dusty, but we're 35 minutes through and we're doing really well so far. So that was my first yawn.
I'm,
So I'm pretty happy with that. Um,
mm,
but
I've got
yeah,
COVID, but I'm
I
fine.
mean, yeah, I know we're all flying at the moment. Um, yeah, a really disappointing result. It's a real shame that we couldn't get anything out of this one because I think based on West Ham's recent form, especially, it felt like this should have been a game that we were winning. But as a few people had said during the week, it's so Fulhamish that we come up against a team who are in a relegation battle, just got battered 5-1, and we lose 1-0, having 77% possession, which I don't think I've ever seen in a game of football in the Premier League before. Even when minnows are coming up against Man City, they're still cracking 30%. This was a real possession drubbing that we just couldn't take advantage of, which is a real shame.
So
Look,
what's
let's
going to
let's
happen? What's going to happen? Do you believe that Silver? We can discuss it as much as we like, but do you believe that Silver and Boa are actually going to make this change in terms of how we play up front?
um, look. It's tough. I'd love to see them make the change, but actually doing it is a completely different story. I think it's a big risk to take, but at the same time, based on what's happening at the moment, you do have to take a bit of a risk and make a change. I'd almost like to see us um, make some more sweeping changes and bring in players like Luke Harris and give him a start, and maybe some of the other youth players who have been really impressive so far this season. Maybe someone like a Terrier Blades or um, one of those youth strikers who are putting the ball in the back of the net fairly regularly. If Vinicius can't do it, try someone else. Um,
Yep,
Maybe
I
try
agree.
the same system again with a different striker because we do have other strikers at the club. They're youth players, but they're still strikers who are putting goals away fairly regularly because our youth team's doing superbly this season. I don't see why you wouldn't give one of those guys a crack just to see what happens. Expecting the
I
worst.
don't know them. I don't know them well enough, but are they going to have the physicality to be able to play in that same style as a Mitra up front, with the likelihood of scoring goals in the
Well, I
Premier
mean,
League?
no one's going to have the same physicality as Mitro, but if you look at the under 21 side, you've got Terrier Blade, who's a striker who's doing very well this season, scoring goals.
Which is a
Marshall
great
Godot
name,
as
by the way.
well. Yeah. Marshall Godot as well is scoring goals up front. He's been very good so far this season. Callum McFarlane as well. Um, they're definitely not slight players. I don't think they're going to get massively bumped off the ball. Um, for Marshall Godot, for example, has played a couple of games in the Carabao Cup, played a season in non-league, when he was still quite young as well. I'd actually just like to see them given a crack, and even if it doesn't go to plan, I think you can still say you've tried it and tried to make something happen. You got someone like Luke Harris who's so well thought of, but not getting games at the moment when things aren't going well. I don't know why you wouldn't just kind of throw him in the deep end and say, look, things aren't going well already. Why don't you go in there and see if you can turn it around and make a name for yourself? And we did it with Carvalho previously. We've done it with not so much with Harvey Elliott. We gave him a couple of games, but I think now's the time when you're not sort of in panic mode a little bit to actually throw some of these guys in and say, there's no pressure on you because we're currently underperforming. Come in and maybe make the position your own, and maybe we find out that Luke Harris, because he's tipped to be an absolute star one day, he's still getting picked for the Welsh national team, having just played under 21s football all year. I'd be definitely giving some of those younger guys a crack and trying the same system that they are playing as well down in the under 21s and try and get something to actually click and maybe just try something different.
I honestly, I can't see a great likelihood that those other two young guys that you mentioned, who we've never seen on the team sheet, are going to be suddenly swung in. Luke
Yep.
Harris, absolutely, absolutely. You know, he's actually, yeah, we haven't seen a lot of him, but we've seen him in far more competitive games than the one we played last night. And I he will not embarrass himself. Which you know, I mean, the manager's not going to go into panic mode and bring a couple of youth players who've never even been rolled out at senior level before, because if that doesn't work, it's going to look terrible. And I think they'd be concerned about that. But I don't think there's a great risk that Luke Harris would embarrass himself. He's plenty skillful
Well,
enough
I
and
mean, Luke
confident
Harris
enough.
didn't even make the bench last night, which was kind of
Mm,
disappointing. I'd also say it was disappointing that Lukic didn't get on. Sending Kenny Tete on. Um, he came on in the 68th minute. Who did he? He came on for Suarez. I understand the change that we made there, but I would have liked to see us maybe take off a defender because we didn't need four defenders. Let's be honest. Um,
mm,
take off Suarez and then bring on another winger or another attacking player and just try and push the ball forward and see if we can do something. But like I said, I feel like we're not trying anything different, and maybe we just do need to try something different, because if we do, that will actually be the catalyst for making something happen. And it's just like I said, it just feels very disappointing at the moment. It feels like we're just you know we've got our feet up basically. Um, Yeah, so look, a couple other little comments coming through here on our live stream. Black, White, and Fred. I think if we do go false nine, then we need TC on the pitch to pick the killer ball in behind. I'd agree with that completely. I think Kearney, when he comes on, adds so much
mm,
creativity to the side. Um,
mm.
and we saw it last night. It just seems to calm everything down a little bit more. I think we
He's
didn't need Harrison Reed yesterday.
But also he totally suits that kind of he plays wonderful through balls. He's got the vision. He's weight of pass to set up those little intricate plays is very
Mm.
good. He's the genuine article and for that style of play for sure. I'd agree with that.
And it'd be interesting as well. I know we've got Neeskens not far off full fitness. He's obviously back training with the squad at the moment. Um, I wouldn't be overly surprised if we saw him potentially rushed back in. Maybe not starting, but coming off the bench. I think he adds a really good option. He's tricky. He is creative. He'll try things and he'll be able to do them. Similar to, as you said with Bobby, he's got quite quick feet and he's quite skillful as well. And I think Neeskens is almost a step above that. So I'd be really interested to see if we rush Neeskens back into the side a little bit rather than giving him, realistically, if you didn't have to, you probably wouldn't play him again for the rest of the season, just to make sure that he's fully recovered for next year. But I wouldn't be surprised if we actually do see him come into the team over the next few weeks if he's back training with the first team squad. So that will be quite interesting to see how that one pans out. And but yeah, I think the next team selection is going to be kind of telling. I'd be surprised if we keep it exactly the same. I don't think that same 11 will come out. I expect we'll probably see Harrison Reed out of the side. I'd say the wingers will probably be different, and I wouldn't be surprised if we didn't see Vinicius again.
Mm. Which is obviously, as we've said before, a real shame for him. It's a bit of a hammer blow to his confidence. But I think, business is business, and Premier League is Premier League, and um, the development of players is something that has to happen alongside the overall greater goal of
Yeah,
of
it's the
actually
bigger
being
picture.
successful.
The bigger picture comes first here, and the bigger picture is, you know, ideally turning results around and getting wins. And after that, I'd say rather than giving Vinicius minutes, I'd be saying a bigger picture here is actually giving some of the youth players minutes and getting them on the field and seeing what they have to offer. So I think the Vinicius argument starts to drop very far down the list very quickly at this stage. So yeah,
Mm.
it'll be interesting to see how we line up against Everton. But I would I would expect some changes. And look, I personally hope for some changes because like I said, we need to mix it up because it's been a little bit too long now. And I know there was some comments made on the Fulhamish podcast saying we need to look at the table and just remember we are sitting in 10th place at the moment. We've had a great season. We're not getting relegated. We do need to remain positive, but it is tough to remain positive when you're seeing results like this. And actually, the reason we're not super positive is because we know that changes need to happen before next season. Because if we go into next season with a squad that is similarly thin to the current squad, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. And I think this is just opening our eyes a little bit to how well we've managed to play this season. But there's some deeper issues that are lying slightly beneath. And I'm sure they'll get resolved and I'm sure they'll get addressed. But it is worrying to see just how thin we are basically at this stage when we lose effectively one senior player.
Well, again, and I hate to sort of try and dig this kind of positive out of it all, but if there was ever any risk that the Khans thought we were good to go with this squad for next season, I think that's been laid before them now pretty clearly that provided, financial fair play gives us some headroom, and it looks like it does, we have to spend some money now because we've proven that we can be a mid-table club and potentially so much more if we've got the right squad, which we clearly don't.
Yeah, 100%. Look, one last thing that I do want to talk about just before we move on and look at some tweets. The West Ham goal itself, in the lead up, the ball bobbles around a bit and it does seem to strike Jared. I think it wasn't Jared Byrne. I can't remember who it was, but the ball does bobble up and hit the West Ham player on both arms, it looked like. Do you think there was much in that, or do you think you could classify that as accidental, arms close to his body in a natural position, and didn't give him that much of an advantage?
Well, the last point you make, I think, is the most significant point you make. I watched that a couple of times, and whether or not it's accidental, what's interesting about it, I think, is that the way the ball rebounds off his clearly off his hand or lower arm, knocks the ball in the opposite direction to which Robinson is predicting the ball is going to fall, and it wrong foots him.
Mm-hmm.
So it actually provides the player who wasn't Bowen, as the player before. I can see his face. I can't remember his name. It actually provides him with quite an advantage because Robinson is now wrong-footed, and Robinson thinks it's going to his left. Maybe Robinson always thinks it's going to his left, but it actually falls to his right, and he gets around him. So it's a definite advantage. And given that, I know it wasn't the immediate play that scores the goal, but given the significance of that play in the lead up, I don't know why. And again, maybe I just don't know enough about what VAR's capacity is to overrule things and pull things up. But I would have thought, in the context of how that goal is constructed, that handball, whether deliberate or not, is actually has put us at a disadvantage without
It feels
trying
like
to sound like a whinge.
no. It feels like it should have been checked, and I'm not 100% sure why it wasn't checked. It's a tough one, and
I'm not complaining. I'm not complaining about the own goal. We've discussed that. That ball goes in because the ball hits Harrison Reed. Okay, but perhaps that shot from Bowen never even happens.
No, it wouldn't. If it got called for a handball
incident,
at that point, that never happens.
Yeah.
Look, again slightly disappointing, but yeah, as Black, White, and Fred comments here live after the Man United game, don't think VAR will be our friend. Uh, Possible, hopefully not, but it did
And there's part of
feel.
me. There's a part of me, and I know this sounds really dark, but there's a part of me that almost is not desperately unhappy that this goal goes in, just to highlight how much we need to make a change here, and how much we can't just sit back and hope for the best and just keep trying the same old shit every week without Metro. And perhaps if we don't lose to West Ham, nothing dramatic is ever going to happen around the training ground and the whiteboard.
Yeah, no, I agree. Look, let's move forward and have a look at some tweets from the game. I'll get you to run through these ones if you can, Dad.
Hmm. So this is one from Sammy James, obviously Sammy James from the Fulhamish podcast. Have to do better than that, safe or not. If we can't beat West Ham, then I'm not sure who we can and will beat. Here. We're so predictable going forward. I don't understand why we keep crossing from deep to nobody. Tosin and Leno were good today, one of the very few positives. I'm going to challenge that, Sammy, and say that wow, Tosin still has a foot fault or a silly pass in him, doesn't he? When he's trying to play out of the back, he gave the ball away in a couple of really dangerous areas last night. And whilst overall he was actually pretty good, but he does scare the pants off me. He really does. He always will. I know
Yeah,
I'm a bit
I'd
of a
agree with
broken
that.
record on that.
I'd agree with that, but I do think Tosin did have a pretty good game last night. So
Yeah, yeah, I'm
all
agreeing.
things considered.
Yeah.
Moving on to the next one. This one from at Fulham Flutter on Twitter, Anthony B.
Another handball assist goal for West Ham versus Fulham. He literally scopes the ball into his path and controls, shoots and scores via deflection. Why wasn't this pulled back? Outrageous once again. Look, I don't think it's deliberate, but as I mentioned before, he's clearly got some advantage from the ball hitting his hand, and yeah, it's disappointing, and I don't know. It's just perhaps it's just one of those things that's meant to be. And as I was trying to say before, if you want to look on the absolute, you know, weird bright side, perhaps this is that goal has caused us to focus our minds here, and I hope the team and the management do as well.
Yeah, I agree. And look, we did briefly discuss it before. Um, I think you can look at it two ways. And again, I don't want to try and blame our loss on that one moment. I think either way, we didn't look like we were going to score a goal, and that moment didn't change anything for me. I think we just couldn't break down a worse team than us, and I think that's worrying. Next one. This is
Mm.
from Tibbo at KTibbo245 on Twitter.
Yeah, and he or she, I'm not sure, is another pretty regular tweeter. In terms of form, we've basically swapped with Villa, who are looking real sharp at the moment. Fulham's second half of the season is what everyone expected us to be in the first half of the whole season. Unfortunate to see. Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Yep, 100%. We got one
Mm.
here from Sophie Johnson at Fulham89 on Twitter.
I have a training suggestion. Dot 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 dot. Quite a few dots. Crossing. Yeah.
Yeah, can't say much more than that, really. I just tend to agree a little bit. I think the amount of crosses we put in for absolutely zero outcome was disappointing for sure. And then a final tweet here from at Fulhamato on Twitter. Really quite enjoyable Twitter feed to follow. So make sure you do give him a follow, and a more light-hearted one to finish up here.
No metro, no party. Pretty true.
Does what it says on the tin there.
I mean,
So look,
yeah, obviously a divisive opinion, but love him or loathe him, he's a
he's our
massive,
man.
massive element of this team, and so come back soon.
Yeah, definitely. So look, with that, I think we've pretty much covered another disappointing game from a Fulham perspective. Really hoping that things turn around, and we've got another opportunity again. Fortunately, over the coming weeks, to turn our form around. We're playing against three teams which, should be fairly beatable for us. It's just about actually putting everything together and making it all work, and lifting our heads up a little bit, because I think after the last sort of month or two, it's really easy for the heads to drop, and I'm hoping we're not in a position like that at the moment, where players need that boost. So fingers crossed we get to have a bit more of a jolly chat this time next week. Hopefully we can eke out a win against Everton. I'd be more than happy with an ugly 1-0, but at the moment I'd take any points. So it'll be a big week ahead for Fulham, I think, on the training field, and really looking forward to next weekend's game to see if we can get back to winning ways again. A big thank you again to everyone who follows us, everyone who's subscribed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, anywhere you get your podcasts, people who follow along on the live stream. Big thanks again to William, Black and White, and Fred. Sam jumped on as well, which was great to see, even though he couldn't join us today. But a massive thanks to all the support we continue to get, and everyone who interacts with us on all social media. It's really appreciated. So look, Dad, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, no, look, it was a good chat, and we can't always be talking about wondrous runs. So I'm happy. I'm always happy to try and pull us all apart and chat through, and hopefully feel a tad better at the other end.
Yeah, well, hope you feel a tad better from your COVID as well.
Yeah,
you got a
thank
week
you.
to recover, and maybe sit down and just watch some game tape over the last few weeks, and send a few emails out to Marco and try and resolve our issues.
I thought you were about to tell me you've got a week to recover because you're playing up front.
Well, not the worst idea at the moment, it feels like. But look, thank you again for joining us, and thanks to everyone who's taken part in the live stream, and like I said, everyone who continues to support us online. It's really appreciated, and yeah, we want to keep doing this for as long as possible. So it's all because of your support. So look, until next time, everyone, thank you again, and come on, you Whites.